Hello everyone, hope you're doing alright. I hope you're keeping safe and I hope you're keeping sane. Thank you to everyone who continues to support the channel. Thank you to all the new subscribers, and this video today is aimed possibly primarily at the people who have only just joined the channel, although those who've been with me for a while, whilst they might have heard me ramble on about some of these things before, hopefully this might be useful. Chances are it's going to extend maybe into two parts because there's quite a lot I want to talk about, and I want to give you a little bit of a break for a breather and a coffee halfway through. But what I want to talk about today is blocks, how to basically prevent yourself from gambling, which is particularly important in the early stages of recovery. I also then want to go on in the second part to talk about how to get around said blocks, how there are ways in which you can circumnavigate the restrictions and the preventative measures you put in place, and really how to mitigate that risk and why you should be mitigating that risk. So let's start off by talking about what I mean by gambling blocks. Well, it's pretty self-explanatory really. Anything that you do, any action that you take which will limit or reduce your ability to gamble. And depending on the type of gambling that you generally undertake, there will be different ways in which you can block, different ways in which you can restrict your access to that form of gambling. What I will say up front is, whatever your type of gambling, whatever your chosen poison, so to speak, I would also recommend putting blocks in place to prevent other forms of gambling, because gambling addiction is very insidious, it's very manipulative, and say for example, historically all your gambling has been done at the online casinos, playing online slots, and you manage to restrict your access to online casinos, to online slots, then the gambling addiction will most likely start to suggest alternative ways in which you can get that fix. And the most obvious one that would come to my mind would of course be things like fob teas in Bookmakers, and also video slots that you get in amusement arcades. So I would always suggest that if you're putting blocks in place for one form of gambling, then you put blocks in place for as many forms of gambling as you realistically can achieve. Because like I say, the addiction, the urge will force you to do things that maybe you wouldn't have done under normal circumstances. There is a bit here where I'll quickly put in a caveat that some people do choose to give up specific types of gambling and not others. Personally, I wasn't one of these. I chose to give up everything, with the caveat that I could, if I wanted to, go back and have the occasional sports bet at a later date. I quit everything up front and thought, right, once I'm X amount clean, I can't remember what I told myself, then I would allow myself a sports bet. Needless to say, in this current successful, so far, recovery that I'm in at the moment, I never went back and I haven't bet on anything since. Right, so let's talk about, as we started with them, online casinos, because I know they're possibly, at least recently, one of the biggest causes of gambling addiction. Certainly during this lockdown that we've had, they have caused more people problems than any other form of gambling. Online gambling normally takes the form of online casinos, roulette, blackjack, casino games, slots, but also takes the form of online betting and other bits and pieces. This is actually one of the ones that is a bit easier to block yourself from. Now, I won't go over this too much because most people would have already heard of it, but GamStop is an incredibly powerful tool when it comes to quitting online gambling. GamStop is a registration service. You sign up to it, give your details. They will ask for ID, so you can't maliciously sign up on someone else's behalf, albeit possibly well-meaning. You can't sign up on someone else's behalf. It has to be done by yourself. But once you've provided your personal details, once you've proved your identity, which, let's be honest, every time you sign up for a casino, you've probably done exactly the same thing. So you've probably even got the images of your passport and your driving license and your bank statement on your phone, haven't you? I know I did. Once you sign up for that, that will not allow you to access any online casinos, any bookmakers, any gambling company, including the National Lottery, I believe, that is registered in the UK, that is UK registered, UK licensed. And it is an incredibly powerful and blanket ban for an awful lot of online gambling. Now, there are ways you can get around GamStop. There are ways in which you can circumnavigate this, otherwise very powerful block, and I'll come on to talk about those in the second part of this video. Another way in which you can stop yourself from gambling online, and this is increasingly common, is you can now request that your bank that you hold your current account with, any bank cards with, block gambling transactions from your account. Now, every person who accepts card payments, every business that accepts card payments has to have an individual merchant ID. Now, when they register that would have been registered as a gambling business. So if you go and try and use your card for a merchant ID that is registered as a gambling business, then you can instruct your bank to decline those transactions, and more banks are doing this. I'm with Monzo, they were one of the first, but I know also Barclays, Halifax, and a load of others now do it. If you're not sure whether your bank offers this service, then just Google your bank's name and gambling exclusion or gambling transactions, and quite often somewhere within a menu and a sub-menu there will be an option to block gambling transactions for your account. And this is an incredibly powerful way of stopping you using your card at online casinos. It will also stop you using your card in Bookmakers. Now, Bookmakers in the UK stopped allowing you to use credit cards quite a fair while ago now, sometime back, I think the early part of last year. But you can still use debit cards, and you can use debit cards to place bets. You can also use, most dangerously, debit cards to load credit onto fixed odds betting terminals, the roulette machines. And if you have these blocks in place on your card with your bank, you won't be able to use them in bookies for that reason. So let's talk about Bookmakers next, as that seems to be a good logical progression. Now, for many, many years, there have been self-exclusion schemes for bookmakers. You can go in typically with a couple of passport-sized photos, and if you're going to choose this method, I recommend you get them prepared now before the bookmakers reopen at the end of lockdown. Get a load of passport photos or passport-sized photos printed. As far as I'm aware, they don't need to be the professional ones. I just literally printed out an A4 sheet of lots of little pictures of my face, which was a little bit scary, cut them out and stuck a load of them in my wallet, and then I could just go around to the bookmakers, request a self-exclusion form, and give them a couple of photos, and you're done. You're self-excluded. Now, there will be ways around this, and I'll address them in the second part of the video, but one thing I do want to address now is the seeming stigma. And now, a lot of people don't want to go into bookmakers and request self-exclusion because they believe it shows them in a bad light, that it shows that they've got a problem with gambling, they've got a gambling addiction, and that they're having to do something to stop themselves because they can't control themselves. Let me tell you this. If it's a bookmakers you visit regularly, particularly if it's a bookmakers you go in and play the fob tees, the chances are that the staff in there, if they care, which they probably don't, already know you have a gambling problem. They would have observed you come in and spend far too much time, far too much money on those machines. If you go in and you request self-exclusion, if anything, they will think, oh good, I've seen this guy many times, he's obviously got a problem and he's actually doing something about it. So any thoughts about you would potentially be positive and, albeit silently, supportive. Now, there's a good chance that they won't think anything. You won't be the first and you won't be the last person to go in there and accept self-exclusion, request self-exclusion, and they might not think anything. Let's face it, working in a bookies probably isn't the most fun job in the world. It doesn't pay particularly well. This is why quite often maybe bookmaker staff aren't quite as adept at dealing with problem gambling as maybe they could be, because they're not paid enough. They're not paid enough to care. But that's my personal opinion, and let's move on. Where else can you self-exclude from? Well, casinos, a very similar scheme. And also bingo halls. You can go there and you can take in your photos and you can request self-exclusion. Now, bingo is actually a little bit easier because you need a membership. As with some casinos, you need a membership. You can just get your membership revoked and blocked so you can't sign up again. All very possible, relatively simple, but it can be even simpler. There is now a national self-exclusion scheme which will be linked in the description of this video. So you don't need to do this. You don't need to go around every individual site that you use in order to self-exclude yourself. So click that link and you can register your details online and you can exclude from all the bookmakers in your area or indeed nationally, and you can book from other gambling venues such as casinos and bingo halls. How else can you gamble? Well, one of the things I used to gamble the most on for my sins was fruit machines in pubs, and particularly when they became video fruit machines. Now, I used to love the old school ones, but I never lost as much on them as I did on the video ones. So how do you block yourself from that? Well, there is no pub fruit machine self-exclusion scheme, certainly not that I'm aware of, and certainly not yet, and I can't really see how that would work. So you have to think a little bit outside the box with this one. And the easiest way, the most obvious way of doing this is don't take cash to the pub. And that's something I did. I didn't take cash to the pub. There was no cash point inside the pub, and the nearest one was a 10-minute walk away. Now, whilst it was very feasible to go to the cash point and get cash out and come back, a lot of the time I wouldn't bother. If I left the pub, I'd have a moment of thought, a moment of clarity, and thought, you know what, I'm not doing it. That is a very easy way of blocking your access to gambling, at the pub when you're playing the fruit machines. Another way, which I found worked really, really well for me, is I spoke to people. I even spoke to the pub landlord because I used to get on quite well with him. And I spoke to the people that I used to see in there and the people I used to chat to in there, and I explained my problem, and I told them that if they ever saw me playing on a machine in their presence, that I would buy their beer for the rest of the evening. Not technically a block, but certainly enough of enough discouragement to prevent me from breaking that. And plus, I didn't want to be seen as weak. I didn't want to be seen as someone who'd go back on their urge. I didn't want to be that person that people were talking about, saying, "Oh, there goes Phil, just doing what he always does, losing all his money and being, in a sense, the butt of a joke and being looked down upon." So that worked for me. Now, there are other ways, all-encompassing ways in which we can help prevent ourselves from gambling, and a lot of them come down to money. I've spoken before about the time, opportunity and money triangle, and if you take away one side of that triangle, then you're not able to gamble. Time is quite tricky, particularly at the moment, because we can always find time to gamble, can't we? A lot of us who had a problem playing online would have stayed up till a ridiculous time in the morning when we should have been asleep in order to gamble. So we were actually just stealing time from other places in order to fill our addiction. Opportunity again is getting more tricky. Although all the blocks I've just spoken about in place will help to limit your opportunity, there is gambling everywhere now. Everywhere you go, on every high street, obviously online. There's just opportunities everywhere, and it's advertised everywhere. So getting rid of all the opportunity is tricky. But you can get rid of money. And I don't mean getting rid of money in the way that us gamblers are brilliant at, although it is worth noting that the times that we as gambling addicts don't gamble is normally because we've just lost all our money. And we can get away with gambling for a week, without gambling for a week, because we haven't got any money. And we survive, don't we? Nothing bad happens. And we get very used to it. So how do we get rid of our money? Well, you've heard this probably a dozen times before if you've done any research about gambling recovery or if you've watched my videos. But hand over your finances to someone that you trust. It sounds horribly belittling. I hated the idea of it initially. But I handed my money over to my wife, who took care of it. I didn't go without, she wouldn't ask questions about why I wanted the money beyond what it was for. If I wanted to go out and treat myself to something stupid, then, providing it was my money, But she basically was looking out for me to make sure that I wasn't spending it on gambling. I don't have that arrangement in place anymore, just for full disclosure. But what I do have is a Monzo account to which her account is linked. So if I spend money on my card, she can see what I spent money on. If I withdraw a load of cash, she can see that I've withdrawn a load of cash and would inevitably ask me what it was being used for. And this is a good cover-all blanket way of excluding yourself. But as always, there are potential ways round this, as powerful as it is, and I'll go on to speak about those in the second part of this video. So grab yourself a coffee, do whatever you want to do, not my business, and I'll catch you on the second part. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.